Morning, everybody. Happy day 4 of your Advent calendar, and welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by my fellow Mirror columnist and recent award winner, Darren Lewis. Morning, Darren.
Knock that one in.
Yeah, knock that one in. I wasn't up for the award this year. I thought Darren should have a clear run at it. Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We'll do our best to answer them for you. Those of you listening later on podcast will just have to declare martial law to see how long you can make that one last. So, what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on plans to take 3 railways back into public ownership later this year. Seeing as the Transport Secretary has been in the job a matter of days, it just shows how little changes in government when ministers switch seats. But elsewhere in the world, things have been going a bit weird. And I thought this is going to affect things for quite a while in the news, I would have thought, internationally. And we probably could do with an explainer as to what's been going on in South Korea. Now, it was all kicking off when the president, who's called Yoon Suk Yeol, whose family is facing multiple corruption allegations, decided to call martial law. Darren, can you take us through this a bit? It hasn't worked, has it?
No, it hasn't. There were extraordinary scenes yesterday in South Korea. The current state of play is that the MPs have begun impeachment proceedings against the president, Yoon Suk Yeol, as you've just described. And what happened yesterday, a very dramatic day, they thwarted a move to impose martial law. It was described as a shock move in all the papers and TV. He said it was needed to protect the country from North Korea's communist forces and to eliminate the anti-state elements. And it was kind of seen as a response to pressures that he's been under domestically. And as you say, a series of scandals, a couple of which involve his wife. But what happened during a dramatic day was that MPs forced their way into National Assembly. They voted to block that decision. Some of them even broke through barricades to enter the building. And he was helped to climb over a wall. It was very, very dramatic. But the upshot of it all, he said he was reversing the martial law decision. And what the current situation is that MP is now going to vote on his impeachment in the coming days. And if they approve it, then he will face a trial at a constitutional court.
Oh, that won't be in any way a complete mess that lasts for months that we'll all have to enjoy. What do you think, everybody? Have you been watching anything in South Korea? Are you concerned about this? This is a country whose industry, really, a lot of our technical, the revolution that we are living through, it's dependent upon. A lot of it comes through or via is affected by South Korea. So if you're concerned about buying a new bit of tech in the New Year sales, think carefully. If they haven't made it already, there might not going to be. So what's happened is President Yoon has had his party's offices raided by prosecutors who are searching for evidence of alleged corruption by him and his family. His wife's been accused of accepting bribes. He's decided it's all the opposition party's fault. And not only that, but his opponents are working with their sworn enemies, North Korea, on the other side of the demilitarized zone. And that hence the excuse to bring in martial law and basically just boot them all into touch. Look really tough. Unsurprisingly, the Koreans were not buying it at all. They took to the streets. We've got some great footage, which I'm sure we'll probably be able to show you while I'm talking. This is a protest. Look at that. Almost we want to see that one again. A protester, a soldier is approaching a protester in a crowd who's filming him on his mobile phone. And then he's got his arm out, the soldier, and the protester, in a brilliant move, just look at that, grabs his arm, twists, turns, pushes him away like he's absolutely nothing, like he's swatting him with a fly. That's just a sign, I think, there's an awful lot of people in South Korea, firstly, who do national service. So they've got a lot of experience. They're not kind of, your messy sort of protesters that go out and just sort of line the road. They have a bit of ability about them. Secondly, there's a lot of self-defense and martial arts in that part of the world, and they do seem to know what they're doing, and they're better organized than they have been in other places. There's a lady wrestling with a man with a gun. I mean, they're really quite brave. They're not really scared of their soldiers. It looks in these clips, Darren, like the soldiers are kind of more scared of the people. The soldiers clearly weren't quite maybe aware of what they were supposed to do, how far they could go, what the sense in this was. They didn't seem very clear in their orders or instructions. They don't know if they're supposed to thump people or not. And the protesters are going, no, you're not. Get knotted. And as a woman in her, 30s or 40s, wrestling with a man who's pointing a gun in her face.
It's just extraordinary. Absolutely. And the irony of all of that is that there had been that concern, just watching some of the pictures yesterday and following some of the stuff put out by our defence and security editor, Chris Hughes, in the Mirror. There'd been that sense of apprehension among South Koreans, ordinary South Koreans, at the military being mobilised to kind of override the police authority. There'd been suggestions that the country's military had suspended all parliamentary activity and that they were going to suddenly be very authoritarian. But as you say, there are ordinary South Koreans, women fighting with guys with guns and not being particularly perturbed by what had been declared or what the state of play quite literally was, but getting into faces. And you can only imagine the kind of anxiety that must be sweeping across the country right now, because nobody quite knows what's going to happen, how it could escalate. And what we have seen around the world, Suze, as you know, are various examples of autocrats misusing the system, whatever parliamentary system apparatus exists in their country, to be able to exert their own influence over the running of the country. And quite clearly, there is this big pushback in South Korea against that. But who knows how it's going to end, how it's going to escalate, what casualties there might be. I think this is going to get a little bit worse before it gets better. Yeah,
well, I suppose the American ambassador to South Korea has said he's taking some positives from it, which is that democracy has prevailed. And it's one of those things where if you're already running a tyranny, sending the soldiers onto the streets does quash some any sort of rebellion that you've got. But if you've previously been running a democracy and you send soldiers on the streets, it has an entirely different response to people.
Indeed. And as you were saying earlier, you described Ewan as a Trump-like figure. And that's some comparison, because as everybody knows, Trump has the capacity to wake up on any given day and do something quite unorthodox, which is, as we all know, a massive understatement. So even though there is that pronouncement that democracy has prevailed, for how long?
Yeah, exactly. And we've got that impeachment coming. We don't know if there's going to be elections at some point. Perhaps that antagonistic neighbour in the north will sort of seize an opportunity to cause trouble, maybe even invade. Tried that before. It's just another patch of turbulence in previously calm waters, which we didn't really need. President Yoon, could you not do this? It would be so much easier if you went quietly. The rest of the world would thank you, especially those bits of it that wish to buy a new iPad at some point in the future. Now, on to the main story of the day. And as I predicted on Monday, the furore around MasterChef presenter Gregg Wallace continues to grow. After the BBC's decision to screen the show earlier this week, because it was so important to the contestants, it was bigger than one person, MasterChef's festive celebrity episodes have now been binned. And there are yet more allegations, this time about groping and disrobing. Darren, is it just me? Am I being cynical here? Or is the fact that the show was too important to drop 5 minutes ago and was about more than one person, and now they're ditching one of the biggest shows from the Christmas schedules? Is that indicative that the BBC knows something that we don't? Or maybe even about the filming of this series that we don't? Because if they thought this was going to blow over or this was as bad as it's going to get, they would surely run the Christmas shows, wouldn't they?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. And I think there is, sadly, and given the gravity of this situation, I have to say that precedent of the BBC either staying quiet when it is in receipt of knowledge that isn't in the public domain, and just think about how long it became widely known. It took for it to be widely known that Hugh Edwards had been arrested, and the BBC had been well aware of it months previously. And there are other situations, high-profile situations, many of which have been extensively documented in the Daily Mirror, about which the BBC have been in receipt of information that it had not entered the public domain. So I think you have to assume, as you were saying, that they know a little bit more than we do. But I think as far as the show is concerned, listen, I do take, and I do have a lot of sympathy with the contestants who now won't, as the BBC have been reasoning, this big for them, that they want them to have their moment on TV, having been in the competition. But these allegations are way too serious. And as more and more come through, and sadly, I have to say, Gregg's analysis of the situation, that in 20 years, I think only 13 people had complained.
I don't think that's an analysis. I don't think it qualifies as an analysis.
I mean, I don't even, well, indeed, I don't even think it qualifies as an analysis. I mean, this is, and I don't say this with any amount of levity whatsoever, it's one of the most spectacular PR displays of arrogance I've ever seen, and dismissive contempt I've ever seen. The belief that you could, and you have to assume, and maybe I'm doing a lot of assuming here, but you have to assume he'd been given PR advice and chose not to follow that advice.
The thing you can see with the video, which our viewers can watch at the moment, that Gregg first put out when he said this was all down to a handful of middle-class women of a certain age, is that he appears to be reading from a script. He has edited the video to include subtitles, and he's edited it again to put two bits of video together before he's put it out. So he's thought about it fairly extensively. Whether he's had PR advice or not, I would suggest he hasn't. He's probably taken his PR advice. I think even the dog would tell you not to do this. Well, so exactly. I doubt he's really run that past anybody, but he's plainly thought about it for quite a while. Now, to these allegations and the strap we've got on the screen there talking about sleazy remarks, it's a bit worse than that. So we must first say Wallace's lawyers have denied that he's behaved inappropriately, although there doesn't appear to be a specific denial relating to these new claims. There are three of them. The first is that while filming a programme called Eat Well for Less in 2015, Wallace brushed his groin against a female staff member's bottom and said, "Oh, you like that, didn't you?" No, she didn't, is the answer. The second is that a MasterChef female staff member was called to his dressing room in the same year to fix his bow tie, and his trousers were lowered at some point, showing his pubic hair and his penis. And the third is that after an event in 2022, a young woman was asked to walk Wallace to the car park. He tried to hold her hand, and later on in the group hug, she says that he groped her bum. Now, on top of this, two celebrities, Melanie Sykes and Vanessa Feltz, have both come forward with claims that he made inappropriate behaviour around them, which of course was about sleazy remarks and other things. Darren, two of those first three allegations were reported to senior management at the TV companies where Wallace was working at the time, at the companies concerned. The BBC was aware of some, but not all of them. One young woman didn't complain because she said she was on the way up and didn't want to make a fuss. How many times have we heard that? It's going to be a convenient way to beat the BBC again in terms of what you knew when and why you didn't act sooner. Hugh Edwards, of course, was firstly accused of entirely different things, but was a BBC employee. They had some duty of care towards him. They don't have quite the same, I think, with Gregg Wallace. But whatever protection Wallace may have had from these allegations surfacing any sooner, it would have come from the independent production companies who are like this, you know, an area of deniability or something between the BBC and Gregg Wallace. There's more than just, you know, the big organisation which put it out on air that's at fault here. There's a whole chain of people who enabled these allegations kind of to fester and then be baked.
Susie, you just used the word that had been on the tip of my tongue, enabled. Because when these things happen, everyone throws their hands up in the air and says, we didn't know, or we had it. We addressed it with him. We did this, we did that. We fulfilled our duty of care to the complainants. It does not appear to be that way. And you used another word, protection. We have seen, and everybody watching this has seen over the years, big stars protected. That's the only way you can look at what has happened, regardless of the channel, regardless of the show, regardless of the circumstances. In these moments of controversy, the perception from the outside is that the big star had been protected and the complainant had felt that their description of the situation and their concerns around the situation had not been adequately addressed. In fact, the volume of the people coming forward now, the detail that they're able to put forward, the steps that they had taken to get their complaints addressed. And the wall of silence that they appear to have been met with is hugely concerning. And yes, everybody knows, let's not kid ourselves, Gregg Wallace now and the MasterChef brand, he's finished. He will never present another series of MasterChef, and whatever happens with the current episodes, the celebrity, whatever. But I think there are bigger questions to answer, as you say, from the production companies of the shows that he was involved in, involving these women and these allegations. As you say, he denies them. I think there are big questions to ask about the relationship between those production companies and the BBC, and and how thoroughly they discuss these allegations. Because every time something like this happens, we hear all of the usual words. We take these very seriously. We will do this. We will do that. And we had 13 women before today, another 3 today. How many more could there be? And how many others have there been who have felt, well, no one's going to take me seriously if I say anything. Mine wasn't as bad as that, but there was something. And I think that this is about a wider culture, given that there are other individuals whose experiences are also as well documented as this one.
Yeah. Now, what do you think, everybody? Do you think what's happening with MasterChef is fair and reasonable response to this? Do you think it's just they're overcooking it somewhat? Sorry, overcooking it. Didn't realize I was doing. Do you think that these allegations are things that should be aired or they shouldn't? Lady Sophie says time for the BBC and the TV license along with it to be scrapped. No other TV channel has anywhere near as many scandals. It says something about the organisation. One thing I would say there, Lady Sophie, is that other TV channels do have similar scandals, but they don't get the same traction because they're not the state broadcaster. So when it happens at the BBC, more is made of it than when it does happen at other places.
Yeah, and the other thing that is
more likely.
Two words.
Sorry, Dan. It's more likely for those allegations to come out and to be made a fuss of, because it's the BBC, and to some extent, perhaps, because of the reputation, everything else, the BBC is perhaps a little bit more likely to try and draw a veil over some things. So I think that just because the BBC has got a lot of this stuff going on doesn't mean it only happens at the BBC. I think it's worse there for a variety of reasons. Sorry, Darren, what were you saying?
I had intended to ask you a question, really, because obviously around this, there's been lots of debate, TV, radio, newspapers, and there have been lots of people who've come forward and talked about the fact that almost defensive of Gregg Wallace and suggesting that, in some cases, it's the kind of culture that existed at the time, and sometimes you just got to roll with the punches. So I just wanted to put to you, what's your view on that?
Whenever people say that about anything, and I mean about football or about nuclear veterans or about, what used to be okay when we were younger and that kind of stuff, it was never okay. It was never okay. People just put up with it and didn't argue in the way that they're more empowered to do now. This stuff, whatever it is that we're talking about in any possible scandal, whether it's about bullying in sport or homosexuality in football or what's happened to the nuclear veterans or the infected blood scandal or Hillsborough or how police were able to falsify their witness statements at the Hillsborough event, it was never okay. It was never okay for anybody ever to do what Gregg Wallace has been accused of doing, which is to brush his penis against a woman's backside without being invited to. Never okay. Never okay when my granddad was growing up as a working class man. Never okay when any of us have ever been alive. It's just that people didn't used to complain. They just have to put up with it. We don't have to put up with it anymore.
Do you know, I'm so glad you said that, Susie, because we do have that, don't we? The people who say, oh, you can't say anything anymore. You can't do anything anymore. And they use, terms like PC and the world's gone mad. But actually, in those days, you got away with that kind of thing because there wasn't this duty of care that's being exercised, because people didn't use their voices, because people didn't feel empowered. But the young women of that time that felt intimidated into silence are now older, more experienced women of seniority who are able to say, I'm going to protect other women in my position and younger women from that. I had a conversation with my girls today, again, because this is a real-time example of what has existed, what does exist, what will exist in the workplace, and it's important for them to be aware of what to do. And I would imagine a lot of people have done as well. And you're right, it was never okay, but people got away with it because they were enabled, they were protected. Young women and men felt intimidated by the situation. They were worried about their positions if they raised the alarm. And now a wider conversation has to be had. We say this all the time and again it happens, about how a culture can continue to exist. Because these aren't even historic allegations going back to the 90s this is less than a decade ago. It beggars belief that you could have a set of circumstances where somebody could have this many complaints about them working on shows for the state broadcaster.
No, I know, but how many of us have worked in a place in any walk of life where there's someone who has a lot of complaints about them and doesn't seem to make an awful lot of difference? That happens in lots of places, unfortunately, in institutions. Bridget, whose comment was up earlier on, said he's a disgrace. It's the BBC yet again. Richard says, Bruce Forsyth, in a very different era, still remaining as national treasure, pushed the envelope with replacement partners lined up as his career went along. Few bad words in consequence now. I think you're talking about his screen partners, that he had various different young women on air with him. Steve says, as the BBC has space to fill in their schedule, they could show Britain's nuclear bomb scandal, our story again. It's an excellent documentary. Well done, Steve. I don't think they could show it every Saturday night, but if only they would.
Can I ask you another question, Susie? I'm asking a lot of you, but obviously your perspective on this is far more, I might suggest, important than mine. What do you say to those people who talk about the fact that around these cookery shows there exists a discourse, almost an innuendo-laden discourse, that maybe should be examined as well?
I think the fact that they try to talk about soggy bottoms and you know it's slightly flaccid and whatever it might be in any of these cookery shows is done to titillate the audience. It's done to be like that kind of pantomime level stuff where it's something your children can watch and not get the joke, but the adults can go in the background, a bit like saying that MasterChef's been pulled off. And yes,
do you think it gives rise to that kind of atmosphere, culture, belief?
No, because me saying this, me making innuendos now on air doesn't give me carte blanche, Darren, to come and rub myself against you.
Indeed.
Just sorry, it's not going to happen, mate. You can beg, it's not going to happen. But it's just, that's not that isn't a reason to do it. Yes, we have those titillating shows. I think it's more to do with the fact that those shows frequently they come across to me as bullying because you're not doing it right. That's not perfect. Try again. And the cold, steely blue eyes of Mary Berry boring into you as you fail. I find it, I've never liked it. I don't like the idea of perfection with food because it all ends up in the same place in the end. So long as it tastes all right, stuff the rest of it, frankly. We had a comment which we've just dropped. If we can have that one back. And we'll just deal with this before we move on to some good news, which we have managed to find for you in the end. Char says, perhaps using the word pulled off isn't the best considering the content law. Well, you've just done it again, Char. You've made me do it again. Now, so we have this issue now with MasterChef. Does it come back? Gregg Wallace, he definitely probably can't do a cookery program again. If there was a program about being quite arrogant and not getting it, no doubt he may be able to front something on a different channel at some point in the future if things don't get any worse. Can I just back Darren after some serious allegations, and it's lost some viewers. It's lost a bit of its sparkle, but it's still a jewel in the BBC crown, isn't it? Is that going to happen to MasterChef, do you think?
I think MasterChef stays. I mean, I watch, because I had young children, I watch a lot of the junior MasterChef show, and it's hugely entertaining without all of the, for me, nonsense around that kind of innuendo. And the cookery shows are a staple of our televisual diet. So I don't think that the show itself is going anywhere. But I think, like a lot of these shows that are mired in scandal, it needs a rebrand. It needs people who are presenters for the modern era, presenters who don't feel the need to go there with that kind of language and that kind of discourse and that kind of conduct. And listen, I think Gregg Wallace is finished on any show, not just cookery shows or the MasterChef brand. But I think that the brand itself is strong enough to survive that, because people do have that interest in that genre.
Einstein's cat says all cookery shows are full of innuendo, always have been. I think you have a good point, Einstein.
I disagree with that. I mean, I'd love it if
Dear Smith, I don't really
could come back. I've watched Gordon Ramsay shows. I watch a lot of them, the American MasterChef, and you don't get any innuendo in those shows. As I said, I've watched the Junior MasterChef show, and there's nothing in those. And again, they're all hugely entertaining. You can have cookery shows without innuendo. I would push back massively against that.
Sophie wants MasterChef if says they could replace Gregg Wallace with Gordon Ramsay, but then I think we'd probably get some other stories about people being shouted at. I don't think Gordon Ramsay's ever been accused of that, but that kind of, the manner and the TV persona, isn't it?
Yeah, your point. But again, Gordon's in that the American MasterChef shows, and he's straight talking. But I never felt, and I watched those shows with my kids, and if I felt that there was conduct in those shows that possibly was across the line, we wouldn't watch it together. But I find it appropriate enough to be able to do.
Yeah, but we have definitely watched them in the past. Though. I mean, that the memes about being in an idiot sandwich and stuff like this.
Yeah, that's some of the later ones, isn't it? Some of the ones that are on later at night. But I certainly, he does a variety of shows as well. The kitchen, the kitchen nightmares, where the language is a lot more fruity. But I think a lot of what I've watched with the kids has been age appropriate. But all I will say, and I know a lot of people are coming at me, and that's great, because I think it's good to have a debate around this. But I just feel that I would prefer to watch cookery shows without the innuendo. I think there are so many talents, so much lack of talent, but I think they are entertaining enough for us not to be mired in that kind of discourse.
Do you know what? I hate cookery shows. I hate them, and I only want to see things on television that has some, like the people on Strictly who can't dance at all and then end up learning to dance. People who cannot cook, who are making some kind of horrible splodge, and then by the end of it are making something lovely and wonderful. Great. Everything else, get knotted with your perfect looking puddings. I don't give a damn. If it tastes nice, it's going in my face.
You're a Grinch.
And more Jaffa cakes, please. Now, so we've got this issue with Wallace and MasterChef. We'll have to see how they pan out. Various of you have had various things to say about that, flashed up on the screen as we're going. But we have managed to find some good news in the world for you, despite how difficult and nasty it is at the moment. And here it is. Now, there is a lot of instability. No one's quite sure which way's up in some cases, but one scientist thinks it's all going to be okay. A chap called Professor Tim Coulson from Oxford University, no less, reckons that if there is a third world war and we all get irradiated, it could lead to humans developing new abilities just like superheroes in the comic books. He says we could get smaller and learn to fly around like bats. We could develop X-ray vision or super strength like Superman, maybe even develop body armor like armadillos. Darren, is this proof that when the worst happens, humans can, if they try, still somehow find a way to come out on top?
Well,
or is it proof that Oxford University is watching far too many Hollywood movies?
That's right. I was going to say we might keep this story away from my teenage kids, otherwise they might think they can go to Oxford University and watch the Avengers for their dissertation. I think that it's an interesting concept, and I do actually think one or two of these professors put it this way: all of the concerns that we have around the escalation of violence around the world and the posturing between the West and the Middle East and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, this isn't one of the things that come to mind as a result. That said, I was thinking when I read this story, and maybe this is a teenager in me, about which of the superhero attributes I would want to have. And because obviously it's illustrated by a picture of Superman in that iconic scene where he pulls his shirt open and you can see the Superman badge. And I was thinking, would I want to be a Superman type superhero, or would I want to be, you talked about the body armor, maybe a Thor or an Iron Man? I don't know. Which would you be, Susie?
I would just want the power of invisibility. I could go anywhere and do anything.
And would you have that over? Would you have that over the ability, for example, to read minds? Would you want to read my mind? Yes, because if you're invisible
and stand next to them all the time, then you've read their mind anyway, right? The power of invisibility trumps is all the other powers kind of in one. You want to save someone's life, being invisible means you can get there first, and all the rest. It's just power of invisibility is the one that would fix everything, if you ask me. But I would just say to the professor, if you're watching, asks the only people who've been heavily irradiated in recent history are the nuclear veterans, and not a single one of them, as far as I'm aware, has developed a superpower as yet, unless you want to say resilience. So I don't quite think that's where it's going, but anyway, we shall have to see. I do think maybe that you've watched far too much Godzilla if you think that radiation is just going to lead to the kind of evolution that could in any way be positive. Anyway.
Your positive note to end on is absolutely right. The one superpower that those vets do have is that indefatigability to be able to keep going on a slightly serious note. I know we're being quite lighthearted, but you have your own superpower in so much as that dogged determination to get answers for them, and their own dogged determination as well. It cannot be forgotten. If you're watching this and you don't know about the work Susie's done, please do try and find it on the Daily Mirror website around nuclear test vets, because it's incredibly important, not just in terms of getting answers, but having an understanding of the way in which those vets have been failed by the state, by politicians, by the wall of silence that they've been met with on far too many occasions. And it's one of the many scandals in this country yet to be resolved. Susie.
Thank you, Darren. If there's a theme to today's show, I think it is indefatigability. South Korea, democracy was indefatigable. With Gregg Wallace, the people who were complaining were indefatigable. They all survived. They got to the point where they're able to get some kind of justice in the end. And here we are. Maybe even if there's an apocalypse, we'll find a way to get through it. We'll have to wait and see. Richard says he doesn't know if he'll have a lightsaber or a hoverboard. I don't think either comes as a result of the radiation, unless possibly you're talking about hallucinations, Richard. That might be where you're looking. Right. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. If you want to come back at noon, there will be Prime Minister's Questions live on this channel. We won't be here on Monday because I've got a school carol concert that's been badly scheduled to attend instead. We will be back next Wednesday for another edition of the News Agenda. Until then, everybody, stay safe, take care, tatty bye.